Really, you may not be having inclusive practices but not really be aware of it or how harmful it is, and just giving them an opportunity to look at their thoughts. If that's the first step, if thoughts predict actions, and then you set off that chain, then just creating an environment where you can challenge those thoughts. And then once people start to challenge their thoughts, it gives them a bit of a basis for then looking at their actions, and then the flow and effect of those actions and this cycle of improvement can hopefully be set in motion. So actions become normalised, and then they suddenly become, or not suddenly, but they become expected behaviours or habits, and then they can determine your destiny, or in our case, the culture of the organisation. And I guess that's why I jumped in on culture, because it's some groundwork that definitely I think has been very important for our Rainbow Tick journey. I came in on Eldercare's Rainbow Tick journey in 2018, and it was started, we've got two people that were on the journey before I got there, Chris and Tanya. I think 2017 was the beginning of the journey for Eldercare, where it was decided that it would be a good thing for Eldercare to aspire to be a Rainbow Tick organisation. And I think the organisation has been, or already was, quite advanced in its culture of respect and connection and accountability, which have been the foundation of strategic planning for the organisation, and in induction training, and in people being held accountable through HR practices. So, and also having an executive team, the chief executive, that is open and encouraging to the process, of course. So that journey began in 2017. I think in terms of having processes that help you with something like inclusive practice, the Rainbow Tick guidelines are really quite good, because if you think of all of the different things that have to be considered, you know, the policies and procedures and rules and guidelines for the tick boxes, but also the training and learning, and also the HR abilities to be able to pull people up where needed, disciplinary action if required. So all of those things that need to be considered are, as it turns out, and so much more is included in the Rainbow Tick Accreditation and Evidence Guide, which is quite rigorous, I have to say, but it's also quite a template that you can, with enough time and support, work through slowly but surely, and that's why it's a 3-year process between accreditation. You kind of can sort of get to things all in good time. So it's timely that I can speak about this today, because we've just been through the re-accreditation process for Eldercare. So we first became accredited in 2019, which was a cause of great celebration. And then we also thought we can relax for a while, and then in the blink of an eye it was time for re-accreditation. So we were back on it. So I thought that I might go through a bit of an outline of the steps of accreditation with that background for the importance of process. So this is actually a PowerPoint which we used amongst ourselves at Eldercare to prepare for the re-accreditation, which was in 2 weeks ago. So re-accreditation, or accreditation in the first instance, but for us, re-accreditation was about 2 key things. We had to importantly maintain all of the good practices and processes that we set in place and for which we were accredited in 2019. So it was make sure you keep doing all the same. But when the assessors arrive, it's quite a rigorous process. It's 4 days where they visit, in our case, 4 different sites, and speak to so many people, staff, resident family members, volunteers, external providers, and more. I'm I'm trying to think who else I've missed, but there's plenty of people they chat to in their journeys. And obviously, not everything's perfect, so they find some holes or areas for improvement, which then gets put onto a continuous improvement plan, which we essentially used as our guide to improve our processes towards inclusive practice over the last 3 years. So we had to continue doing the same things and then address the areas that needed improvement over the last 3 years. So that's what we've just done. So just as a bit of a summary, or the template that's provided to an organisation that's going for Rainbow Tick to help you in that assessment of what processes are good and what are bad and what needs improvement. There's six main standards, and the first one is organisational capacity. And when Chris was speaking a moment ago, she spoke about the temptation that places can have to find blame when something goes wrong, to say, well, that person didn't do enough learning, or they're bigoted, or whatever it is. But this is the importance of organisational capacity, because you know, the individual needs to be given the environment to flourish and the learning and the training that they need to form the attitudes that are expected for the culture. So organisational capacity is a really important one, and since I'm talking about eldercare, how we've addressed that is making sure that it's captured to the very highest level. So we need to obviously have a supportive board and executive, but it needs to be captured in print in the strategic directions. There's only 4 in eldercare, and we have 3 values. So keep it simple. We have, as I said earlier, respect, our number 1 guiding principle, guiding value, accountability and connection. And our value of respect includes welcoming our LGBTI community. And this was a big one, and one that we, whilst the intent was there the first round, we didn't actually have it spelled out and in print for all to see in the first. So that was a re-accreditation pickup, and so it's now embedded at that highest level. It wasn't good enough to say, yeah, we talk about inclusive practice, that means LGBTI. No, it needed to be spelt in there to make sure we were open-minded and publicly proud of that mission. So yeah, it's set in our primary value of respect, and then anything that's in the strategic plan then falls out into the business plan, which is the guide for all of the actions that and the projects that get funded in terms of the budget, but also people's time. And then that in turn falls out to policies and procedures, which then rightly, it's one thing to have the policies and procedures and guidelines and frameworks, it's another thing to make sure people know they're there and know to refer to them. So if I think of the number 1 thing in our first round of Rainbow Tick accreditation, we recognised fairly early that it was important to get a critical mass of the staff with some level of training. And it's just, when we have, it fluctuates all the time, but roughly 1,500 people with a level of turnover at any one time. We needed to make sure that that basic level of challenging people's thoughts where they didn't think that they were not inclusive, giving the examples of what not inclusive behaviour looked like, so people could say, oh, actually, maybe I do that. You know, challenging them from that very basic, very first thought, the thought that then turns into action, that then starts to impact on the culture. So the very first thing in our Rainbow Tick journey, or one of the very first things, was to get that training started, and we actually put it as part of the mandatory training. It's taken out of that now because we've got a critical mass of the population that has now had LGBTIQ training to push their behaviours and thoughts forward, and we've got some evidence that's been happening. And now it's part of induction training, so every single person within their first month with the organisation has LGBTIQ training. Review of our document. So this summary of key points has been our re-accreditation, some of the things that were over and above what we did the first time. So reviewing all of our documents and website for gender neutral language was a key thing this time around. The other thing is to be able to benchmark improvements in behaviour, and we now have our staff survey, which is conducted every 2 years. There are questions around asking people if they're part of the LGBTIQ community, how they feel, how they're feeling at work, whether they feel they're treated with inclusivity and respect. And now we're doing the second round this year. So is it the second one?
Yeah.
Yeah, second one. So we're now able to benchmark our results. So that's a move forward. The second standard, of course, is about workforce development, which I've already touched on the importance of that, and the fact that we all staff have that as part of their induction training. But added to that is a phase 2 deeper level of learning, which we've been able to enjoy this second round. I guess the first round is that fundamental, I don't know whether other people have this experience, but so many people, when they're asked, well, how should you people? They say, well, we treat everyone the same. That is a really standard response. And so it was a key part of the learning was to talk about the difference between equality and equity. And for most people that's just a very innocent mistake. And just that some of those visuals of putting the little box by the fence so someone who's shorter can see over the fence, or pick an apple from a tree, some of those visuals to demonstrate. And half the people in every single training group go, oh yeah. So if you don't point it out, you can't accuse someone for saying something that's, when you've been involved in this learning for a long time, it seems obvious. But for people who haven't really had a chance to analyse their thinking, it's new. So it's sort of going back to basics. So we've had the luxury this second round of being able to take that to the next level. One of the things that we're really proud of at Eldercare is the production of not our first video for Rainbow Tick, or around Elder Pride, which is the project that we developed to help us along this journey. Our second video, which was a longer one, went for half an hour, was based on the ABC series. You can't ask that, those awkward questions. And it was really great because we were able to get our own LGBTIQ community, which included residents, staff, volunteers, all those groups I mentioned earlier. And we were able to put them on a panel and give them questions they hadn't seen before. And the questions came from our own community. So it was a very educative process for some of the confronting questions that were still, we thought, really? Are we still at that point? And the way they were answered, and being able to show that to all of our people. So it was beyond the basics and moving into how people feel when you ask questions like that of them. So, and once again, it made people think about the way they address other people who may be different from them. So that's been an important phase 2 level of learning for Eldercare, of our training and our workforce development. For our managers, we also provide the Silver Rainbow training, the more in-depth 4 hours. And we did one of those just recently. I think Chris delivered it to our clinical and to our clinical leaders. So thank you. And that, we're still this is 6 years of the journey, and still needing to find. You would have found some low level of understanding even some of the management group, but it's the fact that there is an expectation that they have to have that 4 hours of training, and we've now got since then actually, we've got a subgroup which is looking at the development of procedures around sexuality and sexual health processes. So that's a sort of a depth that we didn't have certainly in our first round, but we're getting there now. And we couldn't have really done it before now, because you needed to have that level of comfort amongst the clinical leaders to be able to ask those challenging questions and be comfortable to do that of new residents every time, every single new resident. is now asked that question, are you part of the LGBTI community? And even recently, in the development of that, those questions, there were people in the clinical group who were uncomfortable with it. Really? Well, people, what about the 89% of people who aren't part of that community? Do we have to ask that question? Yeah, we do, because that's who we are. And if they're not, then fine, we move on to the next question. So that's now part of our practice.
Marianne,
yeah,
just to ask, with the video that you made, you can't ask that.
Or we call it you can ask that.
You can ask that
yes.
style of video.
Yeah.
How did you elicit the questions that informed the answers? So, and was that done? How did you?
I think we literally sent emails around to staff.
And
Chris can help me with that.
A lot of them were taken from the trainer's experience. So there was a few of us doing the training. Chris Morris, who's now left the organisation, was the key lead on that. And we would sort of, you should have heard the question I had today, and we would write that down, or it would certainly be in our memory. And then when we came, I was in the video, so I didn't get to hear any of the questions. They really were completely new when I, turned over my card. So it was very spontaneous. But they were, where possible, they were from the staff.
Because I think even that's a good sign that your culture is shifting, that people are feeling okay to ask.
That was the other thing.
Ask questions.
It's not a question, and the question doesn't mean that you, discriminate against anybody. They're just reasonable questions that should be asked and should be talked about, and so that was why we did that. And some of them, I still remember the ones I had. So the one I had was, we have a resident who says she's a lesbian, but she looks like a normal woman. and I sort of read this and I thought, okay. And so then I was able to talk about, a stereotype that we have about what a lesbian woman might look like. And in fact, lesbian women look like any other woman, And so that was, it was poignant, but it was also a bit funny, and it just showed people, allowed people to understand that their views weren't necessarily wrong, but they needed to just reflect on them. Yeah. And we started every training by saying, we are not here to change your beliefs, because we'd get burly, maintenance men. What are you, and we're like, look, we are not here to challenge your religion or to change your beliefs, but we are here to talk about Eldercare's values and how those values influence this particular topic.
And whilst you're at work, this is the behaviour that we expect.
Yeah. That's right. So it was a very powerful tool, and we're still using it.
Actually, if you go to Eldercare's website, there's a abridged 3-minute version on it on the homepage. I think you can find, which is good as well. We've got a 30-minute version actually at the end of this, but we won't have time to watch that today. So the third standard is about consumer participation. Each of the standards have so many sub-standards, and I've just addressed some of the big things that we looked at. But they're all important, and it is in terms of where do you start into the processes. I think the Rainbow Tick accreditation process for this inclusive, for LGBTIQ inclusivity is a really good template, and kind of one that can be almost cut and pasted for other groups as well. It's just all of the different things that need to be thought of. So consumer participation has been really important, and we're very proud of our advisory group, which we've got 3 new members in the last 3 months actually, and they're all residents, so that's good. That's 2 residents from aged care and 1 from a retirement living group. But also we have people from the community and staff and volunteers as well. And that's actually a really good group, and our executive has really accepted that it's part of our decision making in this area. And we've had things, and an example of it is the first round of our Rainbow Tick process we always talked about LGBTI. And this time we've added the Q. And there was a lot of disagreement in the organisation about that. There's a lot of, particularly older people who really don't like the word queer. And I don't think it was the manager's decision or thought that it would be a good idea to add it. We floated it to that group, and the reason we floated it was because the evidence guide had added it. We thought, well, it's our decision as an organisation if we think we should. So we took it to this advisory group, and it was a vote. They said, yeah, we like the word queer. For this group, the vote was it was important to add it. So even though it was different to what the initial executive decision was, they said, oh, well, they're the experts. So now we changed our acronym, which was a pain because we had to change every single document in the organisation and every printed brochure and poster and everything. Anyway, that group was involved in the production of that video we just spoke about. Some of those members were in that video. And also being involved in external organisations such as this and presenting at different forums. Chris Morris was very good at that. Involvement in Feast Festival, and we're really active across all of our sites with Pride Month, and that's been a really interesting thing to watch over the years. Residents who have started with, this gay Mardi Gras thing's a bit uncomfortable, and now everyone's just jumping around, smashing symbols, and it's really like something everyone looks forward to. And it's like the parade is, everyone comes, if they're not in the parade, they're standing at the doors and waving flags, and so it's actually really been a lot of development in that space. And there's that little Elder Pride brochure that we put in every single inquiry pack ever, so anyone who's inquiring about Eldercare has to know from the very get-go that we're an organisation that values Elder Pride quite highly. In the first instance, we had to make sure that every form, online or physical, for any piece of feedback, of course, was non-binary. So we had to make sure, and that's not. It seems a small thing, but you link to other organisations, and some of them are government organisations that collect information. And even when we start to collect, we start to have a drop-down menu, and you send it to other organisations, and they say we can't take that data. So I guess that's one thing that the accreditation agency quite values, the fact that you agitate in that space. If there's more people that are highlighting the gaps, then you start to get that momentum as a society. We had to make sure that we had processes, we've got a data collection procedure, and obviously all the privacy and confidentiality and those sorts of documents that support this standard. But one that was particularly, I guess, more challenging for us this time was to really make sure we were addressing the issue of disclosure. And that's something that we probably have only got to the second round. And that's making sure that we give people the opportunities to disclose. It doesn't mean they don't want to, they don't have to, but if somebody who has lived in the community happily as a gay person, we don't want them coming into one of our aged care homes and feeling like they have to go back into the closet. And so that comes into being a welcoming and friendly organisation, but also asking the question right up front at new resident intake. And, are you part of the LGBTI community? No, fine, move on. If you are, then you move into some different questions about how can we best support you? What pronoun would you prefer? What about your partner? How would you like us to refer to your partner when they visit? What about intimacy? Those sorts of questions that we're just starting to get right now. And then there's the training of staff around that, which we do include in our basic training, giving people scenarios, different scenarios, and putting that to the group. What would you do if somebody decided they wanted to confidentially disclose to you? Those sorts of things. So we give some practice scenarios.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
How do you address the stereotypicalness of, like, lesbians are supposed to look in a particular way, gay men are supposed to behave? how do you address that issue amongst residents and everybody? Because no one actually acts, you know, if there's someone's a gay person out in the community, they don't want to be wearing feather boas and everything and expected to wear that in a residential care facility.
Yeah.
So how is it addressed across the
Well,
organisation?
I think it's bigger than just Rainbow Tick and Elder Pride. It's all people. You know, we respect all people and their differences. It's interesting. I think we've just sort of, perhaps through Pride Month and perhaps through our staff first, it's important to get the staff on board first so that they in turn can make it a more normalised thing throughout for the residents as well. And every year we've been putting on videos. It's usually around Pride Month. We have this big month in June where it's just standard in every one of our care centres. We will play our own videos, but also videos. What were some of the ones that we've watched? What was the one called?
There was like the one people that the really old one was The Sum of Us.
Yes.
With Jack Nicholson and
and then
Russell
Colleen.
Crowe and
Colleen.
those
Yeah.
sort of things that where some of the older people would recognise the stars.
Yeah.
But you know, we haven't done with this. This happens every day. We've got to have these conversations.
Yes.
There are still residents that would react negatively to a male resident who came out dressed as a woman. And we have to work with those residents to support them in their reaction, because their reactions are theirs and they're real. And we have to go through that process about, you know, what is it that brings them to that decision and that thought. And I think you're right, it starts with the staff, because once the staff can understand how that process of acceptance develops, then they can help the resident. With some of the residents, we never get there. We still have some residents that hate black people and they hate Japanese people when, you know, they're 90, you know, are we ever going to change them? I don't know. But in our video, you can ask that. There was a question. We have a resident man who likes to dress up as a woman. How can we support him? So that was one of the questions we had in the training. So that's a really good interaction between the people that answered that question, and it gives people an idea about how you might be able to support that. Well, that's fine, isn't it? What's wrong with that?
Yeah.
You know, and so it does start to normalise it.
Yeah.
And we do show residents that video as well. You can ask that, although it's primarily aimed at staff. So I think it's a long process, and I think it has to happen every day. We can't just say, well, we've done that, you know, tick it off, because
Absolutely.
as we get different residents in, I think, you know, generationally, you know, I'm 66, you know, if I 20 years' time, if I have to enter an aged care facility, my reaction will be different. So we have to learn to change with the times, but at the moment we still do have some residents. Not so much staff, I think I could be pretty confident that most of our staff act positively, but sometimes family members. You know, I've had phone calls from family members saying, I don't want my dad to have that, you know, rainbow tip brochure left in his room. He wouldn't like it. Okay, all right, you know, noted. And then we'll sort of work through that and find out, dig a little bit deeper and have a bit more of a conversation. But it's an ongoing piece of work. It's not easy. It's not something we're just saying we've got accreditation, so tick, we must have it right.
But
We
we're
have to be
definitely
looking
getting
at it every day.
and more evidence of the success of just this continual exposure to Elder Pride and our acceptance. Well, one thing that's been happening is we've got quite a lot of evidence of attracting more people, more staff who are in the LGBTIQ community, because it's part of our recruitment. We've got it on every advertisement and every brochure and every contract of employment. So I've got someone in my team actually who's a young gay man who said, I came to Eldercare for that very reason, because I felt like I would be protected in this organisation. So that there's a growing acceptance in the staff, but we had a nice experience. It was actually came out during Elder Pride Month. This was at one of our care centres, where two residents who both independently had, one of them had a lesbian granddaughter and the other one had a gay grandson. And they had both been talked about their experience of shifting from being not sure if they could talk about that amongst their colleagues to now being loud and proud and bringing them in and saying, you know, they just sort of felt like it was an organisation and environment that would back them up and support them. And we had the family members who were the intervening generation thank us for that, because it kind of brought the younger and the older people together so much more comfortably. That's one example. Another thing that comes to mind, we've got a particular staff member who loves to dress incredibly flamboyantly. In fact, last week was wearing, you know, when you have a 5-year-old and they wear a Frozen costume? That's what I'm talking about. So this staff member had a ball gown on at work. So that, you know, fantastic staff member though. You know, I shouldn't say the word though. I recognise him, but at least I picked it up. You know, so fantastic staff member, and just starting to normalise variety and acceptance and the joy that that variety brings, I guess. But it's an ongoing process. But we've got evidence, I think, that it's, in fact, the next, I'll go through this one first, but the last slide is talking about some statistical evidence of improvement in that space. So the last standard is about being culturally safe and acceptable. And that, you know, making sure we've got those policies. We've got an LGBTIQ inclusion policy and a diversity and inclusion policy, code of conduct, all of those things which are the supporting framework, I guess, for breaches. Risk treatment plan, making sure we think about what can go wrong, and so therefore putting in the work to minimise, what's the word?
Yeah, mitigate the risk.
Yeah,
Yeah.
mitigate,
Yeah.
that's the word I was thinking of, those risks. Yeah, I think that, and we've got all the publications to support, so that's just making sure that we're safe. It's really around, I guess, yeah, policies, procedures and risk treatment plan for the support network. And this is the statistic. So in October 2016, we did an awareness survey that was distributed to all staff, only 25% response rate, but still, you know, given the numbers of our staff, still a high number. We repeated that in February 2020, we got a 31% response rate, which is only a small increase in response. But the statistics, in 2016, 88% of respondents compared to 95 in 2020 felt comfortable with LGBTIQ residents. But in 2016, 54% of respondents compared to 91 in 22 believed that Eldercare is safe and inclusive for LGBTIQ people. So that's quite a big jump.
So that's the survey we're about to repeat.
And that's the one we're about to repeat. So hopefully,
Next week? Yeah. We'll see further improvement.
So hopefully that benchmark will continue.
You might recognise the person in the picture.
Yes.
Our poster person. And she's on our LGBTI advisory group.
So that's, my last slide is actually a link to the video, which I know you'd love to watch, but I think we're running out of time.
Recently I was present at the intake interview of my 95-year-old aunt in a residential care facility.
Right, yeah.
And I was just thinking, and I heard what you do, and including that question, how, as a member of the queer community myself, what a difference it would have made.
Really?
Because I'm not sure how she would have responded to it, but probably okay. But what it does is it's a signal, I think, to family members immediately about the quality of the care. It's fantastic.
Oh, that's good, isn't it? Yeah. Well, you know, even if it's just that, even if it's 1 in 100 residents that feels captured there at that point where otherwise they wouldn't have been, then it's so valuable, isn't it?
And the thing is, we don't only ask it once, because we recognise in that environment, oh no. But they might go, oh, this might be a place where I might be safe enough, and then they might come in and get settled in and suss the place out, and then we might bring it up again in another type of assessment.
Yeah.
And,
And the family members are important.
yeah, absolutely.
Part of it.
Yeah.
Part of it.
I don't know, was that on the topic?
Yeah.
Yes.
Just one more
Yeah,
thing from me. So, three of us here are from the Department of Human Services, and
Yeah.
one of half of our department is the fact that we have accommodation and support services for people with disability. And so I'm really interested in things like your sexual health policy, because I see this as another area where we've already had identified from senior leaders in that area that they could do a lot better, with their workforce in this area. I'm just wondering if that's something you might be happy to share even with us, or you can find out if that.
Yeah,
We're
we
very
did.
early stages,
We got the policy, which we
but it
did.
needs some improvement.
Needs to be improved,
Oh,
which
well,
I just worked
share
out
that.
last week. But we're working on the procedure to support the policy, and Chris has been fantastic. I'm sort of leading a subgroup of our clinical leaders to get that together, and we very quickly went down a rabbit hole of, oh my God, there is such a huge range of scenarios that we need to try and all different situations and variations around consent. Someone gives consent one day but not the next. And, but Chris, who's an expert in quality and compliance
And procedure.
so you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. You don't have to dissect consent in this procedure. You go and look at the consent processes. And also in terms of all the clinical presentations, you don't have to say, if you have someone who's halfway through transgendering in this particular way with these, you don't have to have a scenario for every single presentation. It's more knowing the process around calling in specialist help and having the approval to be able to do that as part of your clinical process, to seek guidance where needed.
And it's like, Chris's point resonated with me about, your staff come through the door and they've got whole life experiences, and we've just got them feeling comfortable about talking about LGBTIQ, intersex people and transgender people, but you try and talk to them about sex and the elderly. I mean, it's a pretty taboo subject, and we
translate the word disability.
Exactly, disability as well, and of course a lot of our residents are also disabled, not all of them. So we're trying to make it a bit of fun at the moment, and I've been sitting to them and like, let's talk about sex, because it's really important. We all do it. And we've got to get over our squeamishness about this. It's and I think we certainly with the senior team, we're getting there. I wish them all happy sex at the end of our last meeting. It's not something we're going to fix overnight, and we're not going to be perfect at. And there's still people that I'm not talking about that. But it's a start.
And normalising it. Like just some of the words that you use in coming up with that policy, like, what about masturbation? And what about, do we help someone to put a porn movie on if they can't do it themselves? And some of those things that, you think, wow, there is a real spectrum of scenarios here that we need to address. But we're addressing them now. We're in the process. We've formed a subgroup.
How they assess on decision and consent.
Anyway, we'd love to
Yeah.
talk with you.
Yeah.
And
We're happy to share. We're very happy to share an organisation, but let's get to the point where
we're
proud of it.
As a community, we want to be moving forward.